Good evening out there, listening audience. This is Michael Cross here with another episode of Unlock the Door Radio, where our motto is question authority, just like one of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, said. And if you went to public school, just look up Benjamin Franklin on the internet. You'll find he's actually quite an interesting character. Anyway, tonight we are very privileged to have expert in many different fields. His name's Peter Van Buren. He has a long-time record with the State Department and has written extensively on the situation in Iraq. But I want to talk more about his other work, a fictional work that sounds a lot like the book The Grapes of Wrath, which was later made into a movie, one that I would really encourage people to watch nowadays. And, well, I'm just going to turn things over to Peter. Thanks, Peter, for coming on our show.
It's my pleasure, Mike. The book that I've recently written is called Ghosts of Tom Joad, a story of the 99%. And as you mentioned in the introduction, it draws heavily on John Steinbeck's work, The Grapes of Wrath, and the wonderful film that John Ford made of that book. I hate to do this to you, but if any of the listeners have not read that book or have not seen that movie, they should probably just stop right here, put us on pause, and go do that, and then please come back. The Grapes of Wrath was about the Depression. It was about the end of a way of life for Americans who were living in Oklahoma. They saw their land taken away by banks, dust storms decimated their farms, and they had no choice but to pick up and move westward in hopes of finding a new life and some work. Every step of the way, they found that society and the economic system that had evolved worked against them, and they suffered terribly at the hands of other Americans who were greedy and whose interests were simple and predatory. Moving that story forward into 2014 was a sad but important journey for me. Following my time at the State Department, I had written a book about Iraq called We Meant Well that upset the people at the State Department. They labeled me a whistleblower, but not in a good way, and forced me into early retirement. Along the way, I panicked. I became frightened. I thought I was going to lose the pension and benefits that I was counting on to get my family through. And like the Joads in Grapes of Wrath, I set out to find the only work I could, which in my case, at age then 52, turned out to be minimum wage work in retail sales. For your listeners outside the United States, the minimum wage throughout most of America right now is $7.25. And people can figure out how very little that is in their own local currencies. And it ranks among the lowest minimum wages in the developed world. Once upon a time in America, that wage was designed really for high school kids working locally, college students who were trying to earn a few dollars on the side to help their studies and things like that. It was never intended to be a living wage for the millions of Americans who now, because of the economic changes in our country, are forced to try to live on that little bit of money each month. What I saw in this new world order, if you will, shocked me and caused me, long after the State Department and I had settled our differences and I had moved on into so-called retirement, long after that, these people and their stories stuck with me. I decided to start doing more academic research into the economy and at the same time traveling and spending some time throughout the Midwestern part of the United States, our old industrial heartland, what's now called the Rust Belt. And I came to realize there was a story that had to be told, that most Americans outside of those areas didn't know. And that led me to write this book, The Ghosts of Tom Joad.
You know, your story, when I heard you on one of your interviews, it reminded me of a colleague I work with, and she's from Australia, but she was offered a position to work on a research project for a few months in the United States. And so she took that, and she said that her impression of America from the media had been one that, well, things are pretty good. But when she got to the United States, she found that some of the people working on this, and again, these are people with good educations, that some of the people that she was working with were living in their vans. They were, or if they had an apartment, they were working 2 jobs just to survive. And this shocked her. She was like, but these are people with educations. These are people who went to college, got their masters and PhDs, and they're working not just on a research project, but they probably are working another job and maybe 2 jobs just to pay the rent if they're lucky enough to have an apartment they can afford.
As part of when I was working for minimum wage, we had a colleague, a coworker, who was fired for stealing food out of the break room refrigerator. He was stealing the sandwiches and things that the rest of us brought to work to eat on our lunch break. And we found out soon after that he had been living in his car in the parking lot and was too ashamed to ask for help, which we all would have given him our food if he had asked. He was too ashamed to ask for the help, and so he was stealing it out of the refrigerator to try to get by. When you're working for $7 an hour, that's part of the sad story, but the other side of it is that most of these jobs will not offer you enough hours of work each week in order to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the way things are structured in the United States, if they offer you more than 40 hours a week, they're almost always forced to pay benefits. If they offer you more than 29 hours a week, the business in most cases then has to pay into our national health plan, the Affordable Care System, what people call Obamacare. And so in many cases, they want to limit their employees to under 29 hours a week. At that point, you have to do 2 things in order to survive. First, you have to take on 2 jobs or 3 jobs, as many as that you can cram into a week. And most of the people I was working with were working 60 hours a week trying to earn enough money. The other thing in most cases you're forced to do, particularly if you have children, is to accept public assistance. Food stamps, we call it in the United States. Technically, it's called SNAP, Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. And basically, this is the government giving you money to help you feed yourself. While the myth in America is that most of the people who receive these benefits are lazy, they're people who prefer not to work, who lay on their couches and watch TV all day, the reality is that more than 2/3 of the people who accept food aid in America are working. In fact, our fast food industry and our retail industry, stores like Walmart, are dependent on this food aid so that they don't have to pay their workers a living wage. Basically, what we have is the government subsidizing, using tax money, the terrible poor wages that large corporations can get away with paying. It is a feudal system that has evolved in the United States where a very, very few make enormous, just staggering amounts of money, and most people do not. For example, in the United States today, 8 individual people, and they include well-known names like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, 8 Americans made more money than 3.5 million minimum wage workers combined. The average pay for a CEO at America's large corporations is $10 million a year, 257 times his or her average worker's salary. And that number has risen from 181 just 5 years ago to 257 times. We've reached the point in America where 1% of Americans own more than 1/3 of our country's wealth. This is indistinguishable from what was going on in the Middle Ages, where you had kings and serfs. We have lost our American dream, And my book, Ghosts of Tom Joad, is about the gap between what the dream seemed to be at one time and the reality of where America is today.
Wow. You know, the interview I was listening to you on, you mentioned that you had gone to publishing houses in New York, and the people there couldn't fathom that there was people actually in desperate situations. It wasn't until later when you found someone in the Midwest that you were able to get published. And when I was listening to that, it really sounded to me like maybe the publishing firms and probably our corporate media, the big networks and so forth that put on all the news shows and tell us how rosy things are. It really reminded me of my teenage daughter's favorite movie series being The Hunger Games. I don't know if you've seen that.
I'm familiar with it, yes.
Okay, well, in The Hunger Games, you have the people living in the capital city, which is a super technologically advanced, wealthy society in which everyone's really into like a kind of a metrosexual orgy of self-indulgence. And then there's the people in the various, the other 12 districts that are kept dirt poor, and they just provide the resources for the people living this luxurious lifestyle. It really reminded me of that when you were talking about that.
Absolutely. And that's where we are today. It becomes increasingly difficult to get by in our modern America, and I hasten to add that it's an evolutionary thing. People here in New York, when I did try to get the book published, their reaction was really that either I was making this all up, that it was essentially my version of the fictional Hunger Games, or that I was somehow exaggerating it or overstating it or being overly dramatic. And the thing is that the publishing industry, as well as most of the mass media in the United States, exists in a set of bubbles. Most of them are based in New York or Los Angeles or Washington, D.C., big cities where prosperity is easy to see in the patches where people live, and the hardships that many people suffer are off in parts of town that you really don't go to. You have no need to go to the dark sides of town, the poor places, and so you don't see it. You don't know it's there. The people who do this work for us, the media folks, rarely, if ever, venture into the middle of our country. In fact, the joke in America is that they call it the flyover land, where they leave New York and they fly over and maybe look out the window, and then they land in Los Angeles and things are rosy again there too. This contributes to the problems of trying to even alert people to what is going on, this kind of collective naivety, perhaps, this collective ignorance. And when the media does kind of quietly venture out, typically around elections when candidates feel it necessary to go out and shake hands of regular people as part of their elections, all they can do is sort of repeat the tropes. People in the Midwest, people in the Rust Belt, people unemployed are either, if you're on the conservative side of politics, lazy folks who just won't get off their butts and go get a job and want to live off welfare and public assistance, or they're sort of the rough and ready pioneers who are trying to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and they'll single out some guy who started a small business and made it all happen without talking about how unique and special those tiny few cases really are. And that seems to satisfy everybody. It seems to repeat the things, feed back to people what they want to hear. When I talk about my book, and I've been able to do some speaking about it around the United States, I have found that I need two very different sort of presentations. When I'm speaking in an urban center like New York City or Boston or Washington, D.C., my discussion is more along the lines of what we're talking about, trying to educate people as to what is going on out there, pointing out some of these facts, trying to shoot down some of the myths. But when I get out of the East Coast or the West Coast and into the center of the country, where, of course, people live this every day. They don't need me to tell them about public benefits or how to make a living, how difficult it is to make a living on minimum wage. Instead, our discussion shifts very quickly to why the people in the power structures of the United States, Washington and other, why they don't know this. How can we tell them how we are living? How can we convey to them that we cannot eat, that we're living in poverty, what Americans call the working poor, in the midst of a country that otherwise ranks economically as one of the most economically powerful nations on earth? My book was an attempt to convey to a larger audience what is going on, the truth about the two Americas that exist simultaneously, perhaps in a way to answer the question that your Australian researcher friend had, is how can there be such a gap between what we believe is America and what we come to find out is the reality of America?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you for a fact that a lot of people, at least in Northern Europe, they have a rosy picture of America being like, they'll watch some series like Sex and the City, or they'll see news broadcasts from the United States. And again, they'll center on these people that, someone lost their job as a lumber worker, but now they have a successful this or that microbrewery or something where the factory used to exist. And it gives them this feeling like, oh, well, in America, things must be going really well. And it's hard to explain to people that on a per capita income, it looks high, but the wealth distribution seems to be going more. It's like tilting a picture further and further. Sure. One part seems to be getting lots more money, and the other part's losing it.
It's like if you make $1 million and I make zero, then the average between us is $500,000. And that's mathematically accurate, but in no way represents the situation where you have $1 million and I have zero. In the United States today, and I'm glad you mentioned about the microbreweries, there is this, again, myth that we can replace factories with microbreweries. We can replace good, solid what once were union jobs with boutiques and artisanal coffee shops. And this simply just ignores the reality. We have lost enough industrial jobs in the United States that it equals the number of undergraduate students in the United States. That's how many jobs we need to create, if you will, in order to start moving back towards more of a socially equitable society. We have situations now where it is harder to get a minimum wage job in some places than it is to get into Harvard. In Washington, D.C., Walmart opened a brand new store in a very poor neighborhood, and there were so many applicants for that job that statistically it would have been easier to get into an Ivy League school than it would have been to get that job. I'll give you some other examples, and the numbers get kind of confusing, but add them all up and see where it goes. In 2014, the Ford Motor Company announced that it was going to hire 350 people in Kentucky after the state of Kentucky gave Ford almost $300 million in tax breaks to do this. For 350 jobs, they had 10,000 applications. It's not that people don't want to work, it's that there are no jobs for them to work in. There are over 52,000 people unemployed in the area around that Ford plant, and at best, only 350 of them are going to get jobs.
Yeah, I was visiting my hometown of Eugene.
Okay.
A few years ago, about 3 years ago, and I noticed it was interesting that the people you would see working, like when I was in high school, if you wanted some money to get yourself a car or something, you worked at the summer at Taco Time or Burger King or
Sure.
delivered pizza or something like that. Or if you're in college, you use that as, so you don't have to take as many student loans. And when I was there last time, what was interesting was I saw a lot of warehouse type places that were closed, that had closed, in the few years I'd been gone. I saw a lot of guys with gray hair delivering pizzas and Chinese food. And I saw, like at Taco Bell, you saw mostly middle age, not old, like, well, I'm going to supplement my retirement, and not young, but middle-aged people in their 40s and 50s serving up your burrito supreme.
Yep. When I went for my minimum wage jobs, when I went looking for the jobs, again, I was age 52, and I'm bald with gray hair. I don't look a young age 52. And on the way over there, I was sort of rehearsing all these excuses and lines about why I happen to be looking for this job, which in my mind I envisioned it, as you initially described it, as, I was going to be somehow working alongside college students and things like that. So I had all these things. I even was thinking about lying about my age, and I was mentally rehearsing, if I told them I was 40, what year was I born? The kind of things that you do if you're, perhaps if when you were younger you were trying to get into a nightclub that had an age limit on it. I had all this stuff in my head, and I was ready to and they didn't even ask. They were wholly unconcerned, and I found out soon after I started working that I wasn't even the oldest person there. There were two men who were older than me doing the same kinds of jobs. One of them was using a walker and had to be assigned only to a cashier job because he basically couldn't even walk around the store freely in order to help customers or whatever. And you see this now all over America, where people who have lost their jobs in middle age or even older, or people that are retired who simply can't live on the money that they have or the money they get from Social Security, are forced, and I use that term carefully, are forced into working in the most basic of jobs. People who worked in their careers as accountants and computer programmers and engineers are now making our burritos and frying up our fast food, and they're the ones standing in Walmart telling you where you can, which aisle you can go to buy paint or kids' toys or what have you. That is not a situation that speaks to a nation that still claims it is the exceptional nation.
Right. I'm wondering this, and I was in a discussion with someone a couple days ago online, and I said something about the economy, and he said, well, it's not as bad as you think. It's not like the United States is about ready to go under. And then I asked him the question, what would happen, do you suppose, if food stamps ended tonight? The whole program was just ended. Because they didn't have food stamps during the Great Depression. They had soup lines. If you cut off food stamps tonight, you worked in the State Department, what would happen?
Well, it's interesting. First, the food stamps actually grew out of those soup lines that you had, soup kitchens that you mentioned during the Depression. And the first food stamp programs actually began as the Depression was fading in an attempt to feed people. If quickly I'll answer your point and then offer a funny, ironic little counterpoint. Of course, if we cut off food stamps today, we would be facing starvation in the United States. Already, even with these food programs, and they are meager, people need to understand that the money that you get is very small. As a single, if I was a single man with no family and no resources, the most I would qualify for was $4.50 a day in order to feed myself. And we would be facing starvation. Already, 1 out of 5 children in the United States is what we call food imperiled, meaning that they live right on the edge of proper nutrition. And so to cut off that meager support that exists would plunge us into a third world situation overnight. But the interesting thing is it's not ever going to happen, because The organizations that are the most fervent in support of food stamps are Walmart, are McDonald's, are some of the processed food makers in the United States. And they do that for two reasons. The first, of course, is that food stamps act as subsidies for the pathetically low wages they're paying their workers. Walmart couldn't get people to work for them if they had to try to get by on the $7 an hour. Walmart depends on those food stamps so that their workers can eat even though Walmart doesn't pay them. And so Walmart is one of the most impressive and money-spending lobbyists for food stamps. The other side of this is that poverty is big business. Kroger, the big grocery stores in the United States all make significant amounts of money off of food stamp purchases. One of the companies that is most in favor of food stamps is called Kraft Foods, because many of their processed products, including for those out there who have had the pleasure of dining in America, macaroni and cheese. A significant portion of the purchases of that product are done by food stamps. The soft drink manufacturers have lobbied aggressively in Congress to have their products included on the list of things that can be bought with food stamps. In theory, food stamps can only be used for healthy and nutritious foods, but in reality, the manufacturers work very hard to get their products onto the list because it's worth so much money to them. And so for all the wrong reasons, food stamps are here to stay in the United States.
Wow. Yeah, I just couldn't imagine what would happen if people suddenly didn't have those. I mean, no. I think it would look like I personally just think it would look like one of those situations where the lights all go off in a major city or something overnight.
Yeah. We call that North Korea.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask is, we seem to be getting more globalization. It's pushed. I mean, it's like a chorus. You don't ever hear globalization really questioned in the corporate media. Well, for obvious reasons, we could go on forever about that. But in light of these situations, if things don't change, what should people be doing today? I mean, I'm not just going to sit there and go, oh my gosh, let's just all give up. And of course, we need to inform other people. But what are some practical steps that a college student, someone going into college, or even someone who's working now, can take to ensure that they don't wind up in a situation where they're part of not just the 99%, but they're on the bottom of the 99%?
Yep. It's a very difficult question to answer. And obviously, if I had sort of, top 5 points to do, I'd either be lying, writing another book, or maybe being a politician. And there exists this very American way of thinking that every problem must have a solution, if we can only sort of figure out what that is. My belief, having studied this and lived it, is that there may not be a broad solution. This may be so systematic, it may be so wanted by the 1% and the politicians who feed off their money that it isn't going to change, because the people who are making frightening amounts of money and acquiring frightening amounts of power because of it have no interest in sharing. And that's where I come to the term feudalism. It's all appetite. Once you have this much, you want more, and you want more until finally there's no more to take. You have it all. That's the ultimate end point. That said, there are ways to ameliorate this, to push it back a little, and I think the simplest and most singularly effective is that the minimum wage in the United States has to be mandated to become a living wage. Companies have to be forced, because they are not going to do it voluntarily across the board, to paying a living wage. They have to be told you can't get by paying $7.25 an hour. You've got to pay more. I can't tell you precisely if that number should be $14 or $13.27 or whatever, but there's smart economists who can come up with that number, and we have to do that. That's instantly job number one. Second is our government must devote itself to the creation of jobs. There is no better way for people to better themselves. Not only their physical lives, the food and things that in medical care that they critically need, but also their souls, their spirits, the will to do something, to get up in the morning and say, you know, I want to go out there and accomplish something, not to fall into the cycle of poverty and despair. Got to create jobs. And this will require changes in the tax base, changes in how America imports and exports, all sorts of stuff that, sure, a lot of people are sort of rolling their eyes at. But you've asked me for solutions, and I'll just kind of throw them out there. After that, there has to be a move to organize workers again. Individuals simply cannot make demands of their employers in any kind of broad sense. Sure, one guy can go ask his boss for a raise after some big deal goes through, and those things happen. But in a broad sense of saying the majority of our workers need to have a bigger share of the pie, if you will, that can only be accomplished through organization. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there were 8 times as many union members in the United States as there are now. Unions were imperfect. There were a lot of things gone wrong, a lot of things, mistakes made, and a lot of crimes committed in their names. But at the end of the day, organized workers are the only way to push back against monolithic corporations. Those are some starting points. My small contribution, if there is any at all, in my book Ghosts of Tom Joad, is to try to bring this story to more people so they understand there is a problem, and perhaps start to understand what the problem is, and maybe in some very, very small way set the groundwork for some of the changes that either happen in the United States or we slide further down and end up in some kind of situation where 1% of us truly control the other 99%.
Okay, well, thank you. I think those are really good points you brought up there. I wish we could go on, but you indicated you have some other appointments.
I'm sorry about that. I'd love to keep talking, and I hope that we can do this again.
Excellent. Well, I'd encourage people out there to look up, you can either find information looking up Peter Van Buren on Wikipedia, or you have We Meant Well as Ghost of Tom Joad. Tom Joad. I just had a brain lapse there for a minute. Yeah, and look those up and check the stuff that you've written and also your interviews. They're excellent commentaries on both our foreign policy as well as our domestic economic policy.
You're very kind, Mike. Thank you very much.
Okay, and thank you, listening audience, for tuning in to this episode, or I should say this half of Unlock the Door Radio, right here on UCY TV. Well, I think that was a very, very interesting conversation with Peter Van Buren there. And I'm definitely going to have him come back on so we can discuss his insights into the whole Middle East crisis, which I believe is going to lead to many, many more problems. And like I have already said in the previous show, I think right now the United States is kind of caught funding everyone in the region, aside from maybe the secular governments such as Bashir Assad. But when it comes to funding a lot of these other groups that we find questionable, I think that we need to look into this in very strong detail. And maybe some of his expertise will be able to get some really good insights. But now on the economic realm, the points he brought up, I didn't get a chance to point this out, but I notice if you look at Facebook or internet forums or whenever there's like news that is maybe from a liberal blog or newspaper, and you look at the comment section, you see a lot of people really saying that Obama has presided over a better economy than Ronald Reagan had. Well, and then they'll misuse statistics in order to get that particular conclusion. Now, I think most of the people that do that sort of thing within, for instance, the Democratic Party or the Obama campaign or his people or whatever, I think they know the facts. But you can mislead people and either create doubts to where people are going, well, maybe the economy is getting better. Maybe Barack Obama has done these things. Or you basically, I think ultimately a lot of people are naive. But you still have these people that assert that things are better than they were, let's say, in 2008 and getting better all the time. I have a challenge whenever you see someone making some of those statements on the internet. Please, please challenge them and say, you know what? Why don't you go out and prove it? Go out and put in some resumes. See what happens. I'll tell you this much. Back in the, let's say, when I was in high school, in that time period, high school, college, late 70s, early to mid 80s, there was almost a guarantee that if you wanted a job, you could get it. Okay? All my friends, when they wanted a car, they wanted to go on a major trip, or they just wanted some extra money just for spending. It was a workers' market. You could go in and you could apply and have a job. It was more of a, well, do I want to work these hours, or do I want to work over here, or would I rather work across the street, or what do I want to do? Especially these jobs that we consider minimum wage jobs. And that's not true anymore. And I would say this. This is what I would encourage people to do. If you believe the economy is better than it was during, for instance, even the Carter years, but the Reagan years especially, go out and just apply for work. Go ahead, do it. By the way, challenge people about this. Tell them, go out and put some resumes in. Send some resumes out online. I mean, the worst that can happen is if you get called back, then you just say, sorry, found a job. That's all you have to do. There's no law against it. And you know what you're going to find is it's not easy to get those jobs anymore. And I've talked to a lot of people, when, for instance, whenever I'm visiting the United States, and you go to your church and you see men that are in their 50s and early 60s without work for the past 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And they're not just, I had a good job here and I'm not going to apply for something else. They have applied to everything. Yeah, they've applied for pizza delivery jobs. They've applied to flip burgers or to stuffed tacos. And they can't get the work. I mean, think about what that's like. Think about being 55 or 60 and applying for a job. You know as well as I do that the guy that's, the assistant manager there that's probably got pimples all over his face is like, hey, dude, dude. You got that idea maybe they're laughing. They're either feeling pity for you or they're laughing when you're applying there. But try to apply to anything better. You know what? I had a job. I'll say this. When I was in college, I had a job for a year and a half working a graveyard shift at a lumber factory. It was a pulp and paper one where, really nasty job. I mean, it's great exercise. I could probably have eaten 6 meals at McDonald's, in a day and still lost weight. But what you did was you fed wood plywood into a dryer, and it would take freshly cut wood and turn it into dry wood. And then, of course, it'd be sorted. And that's how you wind up with building materials. Well, anyway, that job, I remember, I was making, I think around, if I remember right, around $12 an hour. And that was just the normal shift. I mean, if you had to do overtime, you got overtime for it. But I was earning about $12 an hour doing that. Now, I've seen some jobs offered for that a few years ago. And I took notice of it because, hey, wow, I did that before. Those jobs were going for, I think I saw some for the same job around $9 or $10. Think about it. I mean, that's like 30, 40% less that you get paid for it than I was used to getting paid when I was in college. And if you're thinking that's a 20-year time period, factoring in the value of the dollar during that time period with the value of the dollar then. I mean, essentially, you were working for nothing in that sense. I remember how exhausting the work was and just figuring out, hey, I'm earning twice as much or more than a lot of my friends who are getting minimum wage working at McDonald's or someplace like that. And then now it's like about minimum wage, at least for the place I saw. I mean, maybe there's some out there somewhere that's better, but I saw those jobs offered for that much. And then I noticed something. You can go check the computer files for employment and stuff, and you start looking through jobs. And if you do that, you'll see that there's a lot, well, not a lot, but there's a plentiful supply in comparison to good jobs of jobs where you make around $10 an hour. But a lot of those, like my guest said, are not even full time. And then think about how hard it is logistically to work in 2 part-time jobs. I've done it before in college. And, you're asked, well, can you work tomorrow? And you're like, well, no, I've got my other job that I'm working. And it gets somewhat problematic in more ways than one, psychologically for your supervisors and so forth. But the thing is, the job situation's worse for a variety of reasons. Now, one of them's automation. I admit that. I still remember when I had just gotten out of high school, a lot of the girls, that were just kind of like, it was mostly girls. There were some guys. I remember one guy I was a friend with, and he got a job as a bank teller. But you go into any branch of any bank, and the windows open, 7, 8 windows open normally. With people working there behind the desk. Not that way anymore. Most of those jobs have been eliminated. Day and night tellers. That did the job. And then you have other things. I mean, they're going to start mechanizing things like fast food restaurants where you go in. Oh, I went into one just the other day that was mechanized. You will go ahead and type in your order, and then you take your receipt up to the front desk. That eliminates a couple people at the front. The order's been done. And if you paid with a credit card, they just take the receipt, call out the order, and you've eliminated some of those people behind the cash register. I've heard that taxi drivers in the very near future, you're going to have automated cars that, you just go in, put your debit card or credit card in. It'll, when you say where you're going, let's say you're going to the airport, and it'll list you a price of how much it's going to cost to go to the airport. You put your card in, it'll give you a receipt, and you just hang on for the ride. And it'll take you there. Eventually, the idea is that trucking will be replaced, and it'll be fully automated. And so you get rid of drivers, and you get rid of taxi drivers, and essentially it's in the interest of business to mechanize. At the same time, I mean, I gotta say this. I was reading an article that was in the Wall Street Journal from no less than Tyra Banks. Okay. Usually I don't go to Tyra Banks for information on transhumanism. But type in Tyra Banks Wall Street Journal robots. The future is going to be one where even models, according to what the way I read her article, models will be mechanized. And so, get rid of those. I mean, think about what we're going into, where a lot of these kind of service jobs are going to go bye-bye. Factory jobs, you can get people in Indonesia to do those jobs for you, and it doesn't bring prices down. It just means more profit for the shareholders, more dividends. So, when you hear we can make our products cheaper if we close our factory down here and move it to Indonesia or Vietnam or any of these number of places. China's starting to get a little bit more expensive now. Maybe the employees are wanting a little bit more money to be sewing everyone's pants and so forth. Well, the thing is that you're going to have that concept of follow the money until eventually it's going to be in Africa. And all your sweatshops, once Asia reaches a middle-class lifestyle that's, equal to Japan today or South Korea, all the business entrepreneurs from those countries are going to be manufacturing their stuff in Africa. Now, I don't know where Europe and the United States is going to be under that. If you think about it, Europe's old. If you think of Europe, think of a rest home where all the employees are young, but they're from other nations that have moved in because the Europeans have forgotten how to have babies. And so someone's got to do the work. So that's kind of an image of Europe is, a rest home with a lot of German, people that were born in Germany and Italy and places like that, and being cared for from people who moved in order to take the jobs that, there's, in those cases, there's no Germans and Italians and so forth to take the jobs. So that's, Europe's just going to be old. And who knows where that's going to go? Probably just kind of fade out in significance. But what I really think is really killing it, though, ultimately, is the idea that you want to maximize your profits. So big corporations have absolutely no desire to have, or they have any feelings towards the people in their native countries. Okay, where that's even Japan today, you don't see the same loyalty that used to be. North America for sure, Europe for sure. And so these companies will just go where it's cheap to make stuff. They'll leave their corporate headquarters in their native countries, but their work will be done somewhere else where you can exploit workers. And there's no way that American labor can really compete with that. Now, the one thing I would want to deal with that Mr. Van Buren did not deal with is how do you prepare for this future? Now, the thing is, I've noticed this sometimes on forums where something will be brought up about demographics, and you'll have fairly conservative people, usually of the libertarian bent, because conservative religious people still believe in having families. But a lot of libertarians going, I don't want to bring up any child in this world that's taking place. I don't want them to be a slave to the New World Order. I don't want to have kids that won't have jobs in the future. Well, you know what? That is not really logical. Now, of course, if your idea is to have kids who you'll sit in front of TV and let the television and the schools raise them, and just hope that their genetic composition is such that they'll be successful, then, then you're going to probably will have problems with your kids in the future when it comes to getting work. But I'm just thinking, what if all the people listening to this right now, younger people or at least people who are still in the age range of having children, I guess you could apply this to your grandkids too if you get in there and act like a grandparent. And that is to give them opportunities that will help them in this world. Because there's always going to be, of course, the elite class, the 1%ers. But around that, you're still going to need professionals. You're still going to need managerial people. You're still going to need entrepreneurs of all shapes, sizes, varieties, and so forth. And the thing is that in this world that's coming in, that's more globalistic, I would really strongly suggest that if you can't homeschool, then supplement their educations. Even if they go to the best school in the best country in the world, you should probably still supplement their educations. Try to develop creativity in your kids. Try to nurture that. I was noticing a forum. It was a religious forum in which someone brought up something about conformity. And then someone said, well, yeah, we don't want to stigmatize people who might be into, a girl who has a YouTube video that discusses horror movies, or a girl who draws dark fantasy art, or a guy that's a hippie, or these kinds of things. And a couple of people were on there saying, well, those are dark activities. Those are inconsistent with God. And I'm thinking, what? Why would that be? I mean, there's nothing inconsistent with those things in regards to religion. But if you raise your kids with this kind of, I believe, black and white, and, this is just the way it is because I said it. This, maybe there's jobs as cops and security guards and, maybe servicing the New World Order, as many people like to put it. In that respect, military, good job that you could raise your kids for. But if you want entrepreneurship, you want people that can adapt. Remember, Darwin said it's not the most intelligent or the strongest that survive and perpetuate their genes. It is the ones who are able to adapt to change and, still maintain being able to go on and thrive. So the future does not necessarily belong to the people who are the ones who are, look upon themselves as the best and brightest and so forth. They don't reproduce. And if reproducing, you should strive to make sure that your kids have an edge. Because like I said, there's always with the reduction in population that's coming. I remember the research that Jonathan Last pointed out when we interviewed him, the one that wrote about the lower birth rates around the world. As populations decline, this may create more jobs for people in the future because there won't be these people, Mexico's population right now, by the way, most of the immigrants coming across the border right now are not Mexicans. They're people from poor areas south of Mexico's border. But the birth rate of the Mexican population is around replacement. And so that's not going to be a pool of people you can take from in the future to do the work. And so the thing is, this is happening worldwide. Latin America is going to be shrinking in the future. Okay? After this generation, it'll go on. It'll start shrinking in population. And the thing is, the lower numbers are going to be most pronounced in the more educated classes. The more education, for instance, a woman receives, the less children she tends to have. Not because she turns against children, but because of the fact that, you're instead of getting married at 20 and 21 and starting a family right then, and then having a good 20 years that you have at least the option of adding to your family, many women don't get out of college and university until they're like almost 30. And so you cut their reproductive years in half. And therefore, even if they do get married and want to have a family, they're going to be less likely to be producing in numbers that will even come close to replacement. So the people, let's say you are an educated person or a business person, or you're from a group that you have an education, then in all likelihood, if you have 4 or 5 kids and you aim them towards gaining a lot of skills, and you really encourage their creativity, entrepreneurship, and ambition, your kids will make it. It's the ones that are sort of in between. There's always going to be a need for people at the very low bottom to do the dirt work, unless we can completely replace them with robots. There's always going to be a need for those people. And of course, they're not going to get much money for that. There's always going to be a need for the professional class, people with managerial business skills and so forth. There's going to be a need for those. The people that are going to be eliminated in this new economy in the United States are people who are sort of in between. You know, the traditional the Homer Simpson type of guy, or the if you look at the 50s, the Fred Flintstone caricature of the working man. That those jobs, those people are the most vulnerable. And sure enough, in today's economy, they're the ones whose birth rate has plummeted. Okay, they're the ones not having kids. That working middle class group is too scared to have kids or get married, and they're being phased out. So the thing is that in the future, it will belong to the people who have some, skills and know how to use them. There'll always be a need for those people. And so don't cut back on family. Don't get all pessimistic like, oh, the world's going to come to an end and so forth. There's going to be contracting opportunities, but it doesn't mean it has to be for you. It can be for other people. And so therefore you should take advantage of the fact that you can make it even as the United States goes into more of a decline in its overall power economically, and of course what will lead after that militarily around the world. Anyway, that ends our time here. So again, thank you for tuning in. Go to my YouTube channel, Michael Cross. Subscribe. We got lots of interesting shows that have already been made or coming up in the future. And like us over at Facebook at Unlock the Door Radio. Signing off now for Unlock the Door Radio. Have a great week, and question authority and do something different. Take care. Bye.
Well, we knew it was bad, but it turns out the U.S. economy was in worse shape at the beginning of the year than we thought. Today, the government revised its numbers, saying the economy shrank by 2.9% between January and March. Anthony Mason is here with more on that. Anthony, what happened?
Well, Scott, it was the worst quarter since 2009, when we were still in the heart of the recession. There were three contributing factors. First, the brutal winter, which slowed construction. Businesses also cut back on their inventories, and there was a surprising drop in healthcare spending. But if alarm bells didn't go off during those first 3 months of the year, it's because businesses were still hiring. And the latest numbers suggest we've had a strong rebound in the second quarter, which ends Monday. New home sales jumped more than 18% between April and May, to the highest level in 6 years. And auto sales in May accelerated to their fastest pace since February of 2007. But the weak first quarter will put a damper on growth for 2014, and Scott suggests the economy is still vulnerable.
But brighter days ahead at the moment.
Looks that way.
Thank you.
In a Quinnipiac University national poll, a plurality of voters say President Barack Obama is the worst president since World War II. 33% of voters think the current president is the worst since 1945.
For more news, visit pigminenews.com.